Nick Cage.
You son of a bitch! I'm in!
Hey guys, welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going to be looking at Nicolas Cage's brand new movie, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Directed by Tom Gormican, the movie sees Nicolas Cage take on his most ambitious role to date, Nick Cage. Down on his looking out of options, he decides to take up an offer to visit somebody for their birthday. This person turns out to be Pedro Pascal's superfan, who happens to also be wanted by the CIA. But when they get wind that Cage is involved, they decide to enlist his help and get him to spy on his new friend. The movie is written by Tom Gormican and Kevin Etten, and also stars Tiffany Haddish, Ike Barinholtz, Sharon Horgan, Sheen and Neil Patrick Harris. Nick Cage is back, not that he went anywhere. The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. This was a movie that I didn't really know much about when it was first, and I didn't even register that this movie was even being made. I only really sort of found out about it the year that it was being released. And honestly, I thought it sounded like a parody at first because obviously they were sort of billing it as Nick Cage playing Nick Cage, and it just sounded like such an interesting idea, but it just, I don't know, it sort of felt like it was going to be like a big joke at first. It definitely got my attention, and it could have either gone one of two ways. It could have either been really good or it could be really bad. And honestly, this movie's actually pretty good. So starting off with the man himself, Nick Cage, honestly, this is the best he's been in years. He's dabbled in movies. He does several movies a year at least, and this is like one of the first big ones that he's done in a little while. And as I said, this is definitely the best he's been for a few years now. It's a really great performance from him. He really does bring out this emotional side to him. He's such a good sport playing a part in this role because he's very self-aware and he's able to sort of bounce out the caricature that most people sort of see Nick Cage as and the real guy himself. And where I stand when it comes to Nicolas Cage in movies, I don't necessarily think he's like the greatest actor of all time, but I've always admired a lot of the love and passion that he does have for the industry, and that really does come through in this performance. And that is something that is genuinely great about this movie. It could have been just a joke. Going into this, you sort of expected to sort of be like a parody in a way. As it sort of goes on, you do start to realise that the writers of this movie very clearly do have a lot of love and respect for Nick Cage, and it really does translate well into the film. And when it comes to like what they were doing with Nick Cage himself, it really does blur the line between what's fact and what's fiction, to the point where there are so many scenes where you sort of think, this could be real, this could have happened at some point. So I do sort of wonder how much input Nicolas actually had into the movie, because there are definitely scenes that do feel like they were genuine. But then there's this one other section with Nicolas Cage where this kind of caught me by surprise. I didn't really know this was going to be happening. If you have seen the trailer, you have seen clips here and there, so I'm not really spoiling it. Nicolas Cage plays two roles in this movie. He plays Nick Cage, the actual movie star, and he plays Nicky, who's like this imaginary version that's in his head. And I feel like the imaginary version is meant to be like the mad guy who's on like the Michael Parkinson shows, and kind of like how the audience perceives him in a way. So it is really great contrast between the two of them, and there is a really good banter between them. I do like how Nick plays both of those roles really well. Just before I move on, I do have to say that when it comes to the de-aging effect that they've actually used on Nicky, it does look good. And I'll admit, when I saw it in the trailer, it didn't really register that was actually supposed to be a de-aged him. When I actually saw it in the movie and I was seeing it within the context of those scenes, that it is noticeable, and it could have had a little bit of work here and there. It is pretty good. It's nowhere near as bad as like Luke from Mandalorian season 2. It's not quite as good as Book of Boba Fett. You know, we're definitely getting there. I mean, it is getting a lot harder and harder to actually notice those little details now, especially with things like the Kurt Russell and Samuel L. Jackson. But it is a technology that is starting to get more advanced, and I do like that they are able to use it in a smaller movie like this. The other lead character in this is played by Pedro Pascal, and honestly, I'd say he's probably the best character in the movie. It is really strange actually having Nick Cage in a movie, and I don't necessarily think that he's the best thing in it. I think that Pedro Pascal's character was probably the best thing for me. He really does hold his own in this movie, and he is really funny. I think he has some of the funniest bits in this movie, and there's a genuinely great chemistry between him and Nick Cage. The way that they just bounce off each other and the way that they act together, it's brilliant. Now, I'd actually heard about this before the movie. Apparently when they were casting this movie and they managed to get Nick Cage on board, he actually wanted to play that role. He only really sort of gave up when Pedro Pascal was cast. So it would have been quite interesting to see how they would have done that. When it comes to the casting for this movie and who they've cast and the characters that they have, it is relatively small. It is really nice how they are all brought into the movie quite naturally, because you have Nicolas Cage's ex-wife along with his daughter, you have the CIA agent, and you've got Neil Patrick Harris to come in as Nicolas Cage's agent. Everybody in the movie is genuinely cast really well. I do think everybody does a really good job with their roles. I think Sharon and Lily are probably like the best on-screen performances alongside with Cage, because they do have a lot of time with him. Most of their scenes are with him, and I do like how he does interact with them. They do have a good chemistry. Everybody does have a really good chemistry with each other, and they really help bring out this human side to the film, because there is definitely an emotional undercurrent throughout this, and it definitely has got to do more with his family. That being said, they're not really in the movie as much as you'd think they'd be. I mean, the movie's only about 1:40 thereabouts, and everybody else who's in the film, they don't really get an awful lot of time to really sort of do too much. The movie is focused purely on the relationship between Nick Cage and Pedro Pascal, and I'm fine with that. That's honestly, to me, that is where the movie is most entertaining, when the two of them are on screen together, because they genuinely do hold this movie. In terms of the story for this, it's the premise for it is genuinely genius, because we've never really seen something like this before, at least I haven't. There's been movies in the past where it's about actors and they get caught up in the real thing, you know, things like Three Amigos and things like that, but I don't think we've ever really had like a real person actually doing it in like this really self-aware movie. When it comes to how self-aware this movie actually is, it pokes fun at its own structure. There's a lot of little things here and there where it's like, oh, and now they're going to do this, and that's kind of where the movie's going. So it is clever, and I do like how it is done. And as I said, the basic premise for this movie has been done before, but this does bring a really fresh angle to it, with the addition of actually having the real life actor being a part of it. And a really big part of how it manages to feel fresh enough is the emotional centre for this movie. I feel like the film is kind of billed more as like this action comedy, and I don't think that's really how they should have billed it, because that's not really what it is. There is comedy, there is action. I will talk about them just a little bit later on, but the main core of this movie is passion, because you have Nicolas Cage's passion for films, you have it for family, the way that Pedro's character is with Nick Cage. There is a lot of passion that is throughout this film, to the point where it does feel like a love letter to a lot of the Nick Cage movies that we have seen. Everything throughout this is connected to Nick Cage films, whether it's the way that somebody's influenced by it, whether they're inspired by it, whether it's just a simple question as, what's your favourite film, and the way that there's not really a proper answer to it. It just seems to give enough respect for every single kind of movie that he's ever been a part of, but it never takes away from the fact that he does think that his family are just as important, and he does try and include them in a lot of his movies and his likes and his tastes, especially when it comes to his daughter. And I think that the way that they handle that is genuinely really nice. I do like how it sort of starts off like you think that he's just obsessed with movies and that's all he really cares about, and then you start sort of seeing that no, he just wants to share this with his family, and it's just a really nice way for them to have gone. Also, without spoiling why, this movie gets some bonus points just for the love it shows for Paddington 2. That movie is an absolute gem. It's kind of nice actually having this movie coming out now, because we've got a lot of big films coming out at the minute, and it's just nice actually having something that's just small and personal, just focusing more on the relationships between characters. But it isn't necessarily a drama movie, because yes, there is action, there is comedy, and it is kind of built that way in a lot of the marketing. The action for this movie is not the best. It is good, it is handled well, but it's not as thrilling as you'd probably expect it to be. You know, in typical blockbuster fashion, most of the action is kind of reserved more for the third act of the movie. It does take a little while to sort of get to that point, but honestly, the movie is more fun when it is just focused on Nick Cage and Pedro Pascal's characters, because that is where the heart of this movie is, and that's where a lot of the comedy comes from as well. Again, I don't think it's necessarily like this properly laugh out loud movie. It is humorous, and there are genuinely some funny scenes in this, especially with Pedro Pascal's character, but I don't think it's like this full-on comedy in the way that I think that they were sort of pitching it as. Some of the comedy is quite subtle, but then there are times where it does go like really big and over the top and, you know, full-on Nick Cage. Those are the bits that are genuinely really funny. The subtler ones will get a bit of a chuckle out of you here and there, but it's not hilarious, so don't go into this expecting like this just full-on comedy. As I said earlier, with like the premise of this movie, this could so easily have just been like this big joke or a parody in some way, but honestly there is genuinely a lot of love and respect for Nicolas Cage and his movies in this, and I do really appreciate that. Another thing that I do sort of appreciate is the location, because it is genuinely a stunning place that they chose for this, and I do like how that sort of makes the movie seem a lot bigger than it is, but it also makes it seem a bit more personal because it is kind of them isolated in a way, so that does kind of feed into the story. And I like how the weather sort of affects that as well a little bit, with like the rain sort of brewing up whenever people are getting a bit more emotional intense, so I do like little things like that. The music by Mark Isham's really good. It definitely suits this movie really well, and it does sound like a mixture of different things that we have heard from Nicolas Cage movies in the past. The editing's also pretty good. I think that it is edited together quite well, and I do like how there are little sequences where they sort of like slow it down or do some little cutaways and things like that. But I do think that there are definitely a few scenes where it definitely feels like there was more to them. There are scenes where it just sort of ends quite abruptly and you sort of think there could have been a few extra minutes here and there, so I don't know if that's true or not. It does feel like that at times, but it doesn't really distract you from the story. This movie is dedicated to a lot of the work that Nicolas Cage has done. It does kind of poke fun at the fact that he's done so many movies, so there are so many references throughout this film as well that will get you to laugh. I do think that the way that they handle a lot of those references are actually pretty clever. I'm not somebody who's seen like every single Nick Cage movie that's ever been made, but the ones that I have seen, they do reference in some way, and I do like how they did that. But there's also some ones that I think that if you are a really big fan, I think you will definitely understand. There are some really deep knowledge things that are brought up in this. Overall, I think this is a genuinely really good movie. I don't think it's absolutely flawless, and I don't think it's going to be absolutely perfect for everyone, but I do think that this is something that everyone can enjoy. It is well made. There are some strange elements to it, like the two Nick Cages. Everybody's great in it, all the performances are good, the music's good, the editing's alright, the locations, the costumes, everything like that. It is genuinely really good. I feel like if you're a fan of Nicolas Cage and his movies and his line of work, I think you will genuinely love this movie. I think that this is going to be something that you will need to see. But when it comes to the general audience, I think you will enjoy it. You will get some fun and enjoyment out of it. I've just said enjoyment. But I don't think it's going to be for everyone's taste. I think that there are definitely some moments where I think some audience members may not like it that much, and that's fine. It's all subjective, so if you liked it, if you didn't, that's fine. But I do think this is a genuinely good movie, and I think fans will genuinely enjoy it. It is definitely worth checking out. I don't necessarily think it's something that you need to see in the cinema. I think it is just as good as a home release. I kind of save the cinema for like big movies, to be honest, so it was kind of odd for me to go and see this one, but it definitely did have me interest and I did want to see it, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. So with all that being said, my rating for this movie, it's going to be an 8 out of 10. Honestly, this is a really fun, really clever movie that I definitely will recommend checking out if you can get the chance to do so. That's all I've really got to say for today, guys, so thank you so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on all the Rewind reviews. If you want to get in touch, please feel free to comment. Let me know what you thought about the movie. Let me know what your favourite Nick Cage movie is, or top 3. You know, there's so many to choose from. Always love to hear from you guys. Very quickly, I will mention that I now do have a Facebook page that is up, it's running, it's under rewindreviews.youtube. I will be looking into other media channels going forwards like Twitter and Instagram, but I'm just going to sort of stick with Facebook for the time being, but I will get around to doing the other two. That's all I've really got time to today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See ya!